Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. By this point, you probably heard about problems with voting machines in various states on Election Day. You've heard claims of massive fraud. Millions of ballots changed from Donald Trump to Joe Biden. If you're on the internet, you know what we're talking about. The question is it true? Was there massive fraud? It's a very serious charge that every American should be considering. We took a close look at that story, and we'll have the results of that for you in just a minute. But first, you may have noticed America is locking down again. In some places, that's already happening. If you have kids, you've seen it. Joe Biden has promised more of it. Masks and quarantines, limits on travel, restrictions on who you can eat with, who you can touch, and how. The most intimate details of our lives completely controlled by our leadership class. The people who used to scream at politicians, "Keep your hands off my body," aren't saying a thing about this. In fact, they're encouraging it. So the question is, what exactly is this about? It's not about science. If masks and lockdowns prevented spikes in coronavirus infections, we wouldn't be seeing spikes in coronavirus infections after 9 months. But we are seeing them. So clearly the geniuses got it wrong once again. This time they're not even bothering to point to legitimate scientific studies to support continuing their policies because there aren't any studies that support that. So what is going on? Catholic Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano has some idea, has thought about it. Vigano is one of the truth tellers in his church. He made himself deeply unpopular several years ago with many in the hierarchy by exposing their complicity in decades of sex abuse. They hate him for it. But Vigano is 79 years old, and in the way that older people stop caring what others think, he really doesn't care. So instead, he says what he thinks is true. A few weeks ago, he wrote a letter to President Donald Trump assessing the lockdowns from a perspective you almost never hear in this country. No one, up until last February, Vigano wrote, would ever have thought that in all of our cities, citizens would be arrested simply for wanting to walk down the street, to breathe, to want to keep their businesses open, to want to go to church on Sunday. Yet now it is happening all over the world. The fundamental rights of citizens and believers are being denied in the name of a health emergency that is revealing itself more and more fully as instrumental to the establishment of an inhuman, faceless tyranny, end quote. Now, you may not have heard those words before, and there's a reason for that. The usual foot soldiers for conformity in our news media did their best to suppress and discredit Vigano's letter to the president. Yahoo News tried to tie the elderly clergyman somehow to QAnon, which to them made sense. He alleged that a global health emergency was being used by the people in power for ends that had nothing to do with the virus itself. And of course, that's crazy talk. It's a conspiracy theory, Russian disinformation, probably racist. Better pull it off the internet right away. Censor those ideas before they infect the whole country. That's the media position on that. The only problem is that what Vigano wrote is actually true. It's not a conspiracy theory. It is factually accurate. Watch this video from September. You may not have seen it. It wasn't played much in this country. This is the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, speaking to the United Nations.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change.
Oh, this is our chance, says Justin Trudeau. Not our chance to save you from a virus with a 99% survival rate. You'll almost certainly be fine, and they're fully aware of that. This is our chance to impose totally unprecedented social controls on the population in order to bypass democracy and change everything to conform with their weird academic theories that have never been tested in the real world and, by the way, don't actually make sense. This is their chance. Quote, this pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset, end quote. Keep in mind, that's not from QAnon. That is a head of state talking. And he's not alone. Klaus Schwab is the founder of the World Economic Forum. Schwab has written a book called COVID-19, The Great Reset. The book isn't really about science or medicine. No. Instead, it describes, quote, what changes will be needed to create a more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable world going forward, end quote. What changes is Schwab talking about? We don't know. What we're certain of is that you're going to pay for them, and the people in charge will benefit from them. You can bet on that. What's telling is how different this is now from the way our leaders were talking back when the pandemic began. So statewide coronavirus lockdowns in this country started about 8 months ago in mid-March. At the time, California's governor, Gavin Newsom, predicted that 56% of his state's population, that's more than 25 million people, would become infected with the virus within 8 weeks. Businesses would need to shut down, Newsom acknowledged, but he also promised it would all be over soon. Quote, "This is not a permanent state," Newsom assured us. "It is a moment in time." And that should have made us nervous. Because in the end, that moment continued indefinitely. Pretty soon, Gavin Newsom was telling us who we were allowed to be around and who we were allowed to talk to.
As always, I want to remind you, limit your mixing with people outside of your household. It's just common sense, but the data suggests not everybody's practicing common sense.
Okay, so that was in July when Gavin Newsom told the data suggest. What have we learned from the data since then? Well, as of November 15th, about 2.6% of the total state of California has been infected. That's roughly 20 million fewer people than Gavin Newsom predicted would be infected by May. So in some ways, that looks like a victory. Can we declare victory? No, just the opposite. Today, Newsom announced that more lockdowns are underway. California, he said, is pulling the emergency brake. The emergency brake on life itself. Tonight, 41 counties in our biggest state are under the most restrictive form of lockdown. Churches, gyms, restaurants, etc. cannot conduct any kind of indoor operations. So on what grounds is Gavin Newsom declaring this? Well, scientific grounds, of course. Gavin Newsom believes in science, but he doesn't believe in it for himself, because personally, as a man, Gavin Newsom is exempt from the laws of epidemiology. And we know this because 9 days ago, the governor was caught violating his own guidelines, eating at one of the state's most expensive restaurants with a dozen other people. And by the way, he's fine. He didn't die from it. When you're God, you don't fear viruses. Lockdowns are for mortals. So you'd think getting caught would hurt Newsom. Getting caught ignoring your own rules used to be a major problem for politicians. But it's not anymore. They are no longer humiliated by their own hypocrisy. The point of the exercise is to humiliate the rest of us by forcing us to obey transparently absurd orders. Let's see what we can make them do next. Okay, for health reasons, everyone has to wear a Viking hat with horns every Wednesday. It's the law, Dr. Fauci's orders. And by the way, people would do that. They would. They'd follow the order. CNN would scream at them if they didn't.